September 14th, 1941. Liverpool, England. Rain needles sideways across the docks, driven by a hard Atlantic wind that carries the smell of oil, rust, and wet rope. A convoy is forming in the Mersey. Merchantmen packed tight, hulls riding low with grain, fuel, and ammunition, bound for a starving island. Sailors shout orders. Winches clatter. Somewhere out beyond the grey horizon, German U-boats are already moving. On the bridge of the freighter SS Empire Moore, Chief Mate Arthur Collins watches the escorts take position. A handful of aging destroyers and corvettes, spread thin across miles of open water. He's crossed the Atlantic 5 times this year. He's seen what happens when the escorts guess wrong. When the convoy sails, he knows the odds. They always do. What Collins doesn't know is that the battle he's about to fight is no longer being decided only by admirals, captains, or sonar operators, but by a civilian scientist sitting in an office, staring at chalkboards filled with numbers that no one in uniform wants to accept. Patrick Maynard. Stuart Blackett does not look like a man who belongs anywhere near a war. He is 44 years old, thin, soft-spoken, and impeccably civilian. A Nobel Prize-winning physicist. A former naval officer from the First World War, who left the service disillusioned and skeptical of hierarchy. In 1941, he wears rumpled suits and carries notebooks instead of rank. And yet this morning, he walks into the Admiralty with a problem that will put him at odds with nearly everyone in the room. The problem is simple. The solution is not. The British are losing the Battle of the Atlantic. Badly. U-boats are sinking merchant ships faster than Britain can replace them. Entire convoys vanish in a single night. Admirals demand better weapons, more depth charges, better sonar, faster escorts, longer-range aircraft. Blackett listens. Then he asks a question that lands like an insult. How do you know the way you're using what you already have is optimal? The room goes quiet. Rear Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, First Sea Lord, fixes Blackett with a look that has ended more than one career. Blackett does not flinch. He spreads his papers on the table. Charts, tables, probability curves. He is not here to invent a new weapon. He is here to prove that the Royal Navy is fighting the wrong battle. Blackett's team is officially called the Operational Research Section. Unofficially, they are known as the civilians. They have no command authority, no ships, no planes. What they do have is access to convoy logs, loss reports, escort dispositions, patrol schedules. Thousands of data points collected from every sinking, every near miss, every successful crossing. Where admirals see heroism and disaster, Blackett sees patterns. And the patterns tell an uncomfortable story. Convoys, he discovers, are being spread too wide. The logic seems sound. More space between ships means fewer targets for a single U-boat attack. Less risk of chain reactions. Less chance of collision. But the data says otherwise. Blackett's analysis shows that U-boats don't attack randomly. They attack when they find a convoy. And once found, a loose formation actually helps them. More gaps mean more opportunities, more isolated targets, more time to maneuver between ships without being detected. In tighter convoys, the U-boats face a different problem. More escorts close together, more overlapping sonar coverage, more immediate counterattack. The difference is not subtle. Blackett plots sinkings per ship per mile traveled. The curve bends sharply. Tighter convoys lose fewer ships, not because they fight harder, because they are harder to exploit. When Blackett presents this to the Admiralty, the reaction is mixed at best. One destroyer captain snaps. "So you're telling me to pack them closer together so they can all be sunk at once?" Blackett replies calmly, "I'm telling you that they already are. Just one at a time." But convoy spacing is only the beginning. Blackett turns next to air patrols. Long-range aircraft are scarce. The Atlantic is vast. Commanders insist on flying patrols along the convoy routes themselves, keeping planes close to ships where protection feels strongest. Again, the numbers disagree. Blackett shows that U-boats spend most of their time searching, not attacking. They surface to recharge batteries, to scan the horizon, to transmit contact reports. Aircraft don't need to fly where the ships are. They need to fly where the submarines look. Wider patrol arcs, randomized patterns, gaps covered unpredictably. The goal is not to kill U-boats. Not yet. The goal is to deny them information. This idea infuriates traditionalists. One senior officer mutters that Blackett is trying to fight the enemy with mathematics. Blackett doesn't deny it. That, he says quietly, is exactly what the enemy is doing to us. Because German U-boat command is already operating statistically, calculating shipping density, escort response times, refueling cycles. Blackett understands something many officers do not yet grasp. The Battle of the Atlantic is not a duel. It is a system, and systems can be optimized. By late 1941, Britain is running out of time. Food stocks dip dangerously low. Shipyards cannot replace losses fast enough. If the Atlantic collapses, everything collapses. Reluctantly, incrementally, the Admiralty allows some of Blackett's recommendations to be tested. Convoys are tightened, air patrol patterns altered. Nothing dramatic, no press releases, just quiet changes buried in operational orders. The results are not immediate. Then, slowly, almost invisibly, something changes. Sinkings per convoy begin to fall. Not vanish, fall. U-boats still strike. Ships still burn. But fewer convoys are annihilated. More ships limp through. The Atlantic does not feel safer. But it feels less hopeless. Blackett studies the new data as it arrives. The curves hold. The math is working. And for the first time since the war began, the British are not reacting to disaster. They are shaping the battlefield. Out at sea, Arthur Collins doesn't know any of this as Empire Moor steams west into heavy weather. But when the convoy closes, ranks tighter than he's ever seen before, escorts nearer, aircraft circling wider arcs overhead, he feels something he hasn't felt in months. Not confidence, but possibility. And that, in 1941, is revolutionary. January 19th, 1942. North Atlantic, south of Greenland. Kapitän-Leutnant Ernst Bauer watches the sea through his periscope and feels a flicker of irritation. The convoy should be easier to work. Visibility is poor. Low cloud, snow flurries, a grey sea blending into grey sky. Conditions that once favored U-boats almost instinctively. Yet something feels wrong. The merchant ships ahead are packed tighter than expected. Their escorts overlap in a way Bauer doesn't like. Every time he considers a firing solution, a destroyer slides into an inconvenient position. Sonar pings echoing like an accusation. This is not how British convoys used to behave. Bauer orders a cautious approach anyway. He fires one torpedo, then another. One freighter is hit, damaged, not sunk. The escorts react instantly. Depth charges thunder down in disciplined patterns, closer and faster than Bauer remembers from last year. He dives hard. For hours, the U-boat is hunted, shaken, battered. When Bauer finally escapes and surfaces days later, he files his patrol report with a phrase that has begun appearing more often in German logs. Convoy defense unusually effective. He cannot explain why. Back in London, Patrick Blackett reads reports like Bauer's with intense focus, not satisfaction. Verification. The numbers are beginning to align with his predictions, but not yet at a scale that convinces everyone. The Atlantic is still hemorrhaging ships. America has entered the war, but its navy is inexperienced, its convoy discipline uneven, its coastal defenses dangerously lax. Blackett knows something the admirals are only beginning to accept. This war will not be won by a single breakthrough. It will be won by cumulative advantage, and cumulative advantage comes from denying the enemy's certainty. In Washington, 1942 begins badly. German U-boats prowl the American coastline almost unopposed. Cities keep their lights on. Ships silhouette themselves like targets in a shooting gallery. Sinkings spike to catastrophic levels. Sailors call it the second happy time. American commanders respond instinctively. More patrols near ports, more escorts hugging the convoys themselves. And again, the numbers betray intuition. When British liaison officers share Blackett's findings with their American counterparts, the reaction is skeptical at best. A US Navy captain scoffs. "You want us to scatter our planes farther away from the ships they're protecting." Blackett, present via briefing notes rather than person, might as well be speaking another language. But the evidence is relentless. Convoys that adopt tighter spacing suffer fewer losses. Air patrols that sweep unpredictable arcs detect more submarines before attacks are set up. The U-boats are not being destroyed in droves. They are being disrupted. That distinction matters more than any depth charge tally. In March 1942, Blackett pushes further. He challenges another sacred assumption, that increasing the number of depth charges per attack improves kill probability. His team analyzes thousands of engagements. The result is counterintuitive. Beyond a certain point, more depth charges do not significantly increase U-boat destruction. What they do increase is time spent attacking a single contact, time that leaves the convoy exposed elsewhere. Blackett recommends fewer, more disciplined attack patterns, faster disengagement. Return to escort duty sooner. Again, the reaction is hostile. One officer fumes. "You're telling us to stop attacking submarines?" Blackett answers, "I'm telling you to stop letting one submarine distract you from protecting 40 ships." It is not an argument about courage. It is an argument about priorities. Slowly, unevenly, the logic spreads. British Western Approaches Command begins reorganizing convoy doctrine around Blackett's findings. American commanders, desperate after early 1942 losses, begin listening more carefully. The Atlantic does not suddenly turn safe, but something subtle happens. U-boats report fewer easy targets. Convoys feel denser. Escorts react faster. Aircraft appear where none should be. The ocean becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is poison to submarines. German BDU headquarters in Lorient notices the trend, but misreads its cause. They blame improved radar, better sonar, new Allied weapons. They do not suspect that the most dangerous weapon arrayed against them is chalk dust on a blackboard. Because Blackett's work leaves no wreckage, no trophies, only absence. By late 1942, something extraordinary begins to appear in Allied reports. Convoys that would once have lost 6 ships now lose 1, sometimes none. Sinkings still happen, but their effect is shrinking. Supplies arrive, fuel flows, armies move. The Atlantic is no longer a roulette wheel. It is becoming a managed system. And systems, Blackett knows, can be scaled. As American shipbuilding explodes and escort numbers increase, the impact of proper convoy optimization multiplies. Every additional destroyer is more effective when positioned correctly. Every aircraft patrol covers more ground when flown intelligently. Blackett watches the curves bend again. Losses per ton shipped drop. The math is undeniable now. What once sounded gentleman, like civilian arrogance, is becoming doctrine. Out at sea, Kapitän Lieutenant Bauer feels the change more keenly than any statistician. By early 1943, his patrols are shorter, riskier, less productive. Convoys slip past undetected. Escorts behave aggressively, refusing to be drawn away. Aircraft appear overhead, even in weather that should ground them. Bauer writes bitterly in his log, "The enemy anticipates us. He does not know how right he is, because anticipation, not reaction, is the heart of Blackett's revolution." And as the Atlantic turns from killing ground to supply artery, a quiet truth settles in. The U-boats are no longer strangling the Allies. They are being starved of opportunity, not by guns, not by bombs, but by decisions made far from the sea. May 4th, 1943. RAF Coastal Command, Ballykelly Air Station, Northern Ireland. The rain never really stops here. It just changes intensity. Flying Officer Arthur Collins stands beside his Liberator bomber as ground crew finish refueling. Salt stains the fuselage. The aircraft smells of oil, damp canvas, and exhaustion. Collins has flown this route a dozen times already. Long, monotonous patrols over empty ocean that strain nerves more than combat ever could. Until recently, that emptiness felt pointless. Now it feels intentional. Before climbing aboard, Collins is handed a revised patrol map. The flight path is wrong. At least it feels wrong. Wide arcs, no neat circles, long stretches far from convoy routes. He frowns. We're not even covering the ships. The briefing officer shrugs. New instructions, Western approaches. No explanation, just orders. 3 hours later, Collins understands. A dark shape breaks the surface below. Unmistakable. A U-boat, running on the surface to recharge batteries, confident it's well beyond Allied air cover. It isn't. Depth charges fall. The sea erupts. Oil spreads. The Liberator circles once, then moves on. No lingering. No confirmation. Just denial of freedom. Back at base, Collins reports the sighting. Another mark on a growing map. Another data point, feeding a system he never sees. In London, Patrick Blackett studies these reports with grim satisfaction. The infamous air gap, that deadly stretch of Atlantic beyond land-based air cover, is shrinking, not because of better planes, but because of how they are flown. Blackett's team has demonstrated something heretical. Aircraft do not need to protect convoys directly to protect them effectively. They need to hunt where submarines must be vulnerable. On the surface, recharging, transiting, waiting. The result is devastating. U-boats are forced to submerge for longer periods. Batteries drain faster. Speed drops. Patrol endurance collapses. The submarines are still alive, but they are tired, and tired hunters make mistakes. At Admiralty House, resistance finally cracks. Senior officers who once dismissed Blackett as an academic nuisance now repeat his language unconsciously. They speak of coverage density, search probability, contact denial. Operational research sections expand rapidly. Civilians, physicists, statisticians, economists are embedded into commands that once prided themselves on tradition alone. This is not a takeover. It is an infection. Numbers begin appearing everywhere. Not slogans, not speeches, numbers. In June 1943, German losses spike sharply, not from a single disaster, but from accumulated exposure. U-boats are detected more often, forced under more frequently, attacked in conditions that favor the Allies rather than themselves. The Atlantic becomes hostile even when no enemy is visible. Bidu headquarters in Germany scrambles to respond. New snorkels are rushed into service. New tactics issued. New warnings circulated. But each adaptation meets a problem Blackett anticipated months earlier. Every technical fix increases complexity. Every procedural change adds friction. The submarines are no longer fighting ships. They are fighting the environment. And the environment has been redesigned. Blackett himself does not celebrate. He watches the curves carefully, wary of false confidence. He knows better than anyone that statistics punish arrogance. But by late summer 1943, the evidence is overwhelming. The Battle of the Atlantic has turned, not because U-boats are gone, but because they are constrained. Their freedom of movement, the single most important factor in submarine warfare, has been mathematically stripped away. The ocean is still vast, but usable space has collapsed. Out at sea, Kapitän Lieutenant Bauer feels it in his bones. His last patrol is a failure. No sinkings, multiple air sightings, 2 close calls with escorts. When he returns to base, his boat battered and his crew hollow-eyed, he hears rumors that sound impossible. Allied convoys are increasing. Shipping losses don't matter anymore. The Americans are just building ships faster than we can sink them. Bauer doesn't argue. He knows something worse has happened. Even when targets appear, they are defended. Even when attacks succeed, they change nothing. The war beneath the waves has become unwinnable, not because the Allies have more weapons, but because they have learned how to use space itself as a weapon. In London, Patrick Blackett writes a short memo that will never be famous. No stirring language, no victory claims, just a conclusion. The effectiveness of convoy defense is determined more by organization than by armament. It is one of the most quietly decisive sentences of the war. October 12, 1943. Western approaches command, Liverpool. The port is louder than it used to be. Not with celebration, with motion. Winches clatter. Dock workers shout over engines. Convoys assemble with a rhythm that feels industrial rather than desperate. Ships no longer wait weeks for escorts. They slot into schedules. They move when the timetable says they move. Captain Edward Parry, Royal Navy, watches from an office window overlooking the Mersey. He has commanded destroyers since 1939. He remembers nights when sailing felt like a gamble, when each convoy felt like a wager against darkness and luck. Now it feels different, structured, predictable. Parry turns from the window to a wall map covered in pins and chalk lines. It looks less like a battlefield than a factory diagram. Routes, timings, coverage zones, and in the corner, a small chalk note written in a civilian hand. Probability of contact reduced below critical threshold. Parry doesn't fully understand the math, but he understands the result. The convoys are no longer being hunted. They are being managed. Patrick Blackett's influence has crossed the Atlantic. By late 1943, American naval commands formally adopt operational research units, modeled directly on his British teams. Civilians arrive in Washington and Norfolk carrying slide rules instead of rank. They speak the same language Blackett introduced 2 years earlier. Density, overlap, constraint, trade-offs. They ask uncomfortable questions. Why do escorts chase every sonar contact? Why do aircraft circle sinking ships instead of leaving? Why do convoys scatter when attacked? And why does that make things worse? Each answer becomes a data point. Each data point reshapes doctrine. One recommendation, initially dismissed as madness, changes everything. Convoys should stay together, even under attack. Blackett's models show that scattered ships dramatically increase submarine success. Tight formations reduce exposure, simplify escort defense, and shorten the time submarines can exploit chaos. The logic offends instinct. Sailors want to run. Commanders want flexibility. But the numbers don't care about instinct. The policy is enforced. Losses drop again. Another recommendation follows. Stop sending escorts to rescue survivors during attacks. It sounds cruel. It is. But the data is brutal. Escorts leaving formation create openings. Submarines exploit repeatedly. Survivors can wait. Convoys cannot be replaced. This decision saves thousands of ships and condemns thousands of men to the sea. Blackett does not sign the order, but his equations make it unavoidable. By early 1944, U-boat commanders report something unprecedented. They are no longer choosing engagements. Engagements are choosing them. Patrol zones are saturated with aircraft. Convoys are too dense to penetrate cleanly. Escorts behave with unnerving discipline. Even when sinkings occur, they feel sterile, irrelevant. A commander writes bitterly in his diary, "We strike, and the sea closes behind us as if nothing happened." At BDU headquarters, Admiral Karl Dönitz studies lost charts with growing disbelief. This is not a tactical failure. It is structural. The U-boat fleet was designed for a world where the ocean was empty and time favored the attacker. Blackett has inverted both assumptions. The ocean is now monitored, and time favors the defender. Patrick Blackett visits Washington briefly in March 1944. He does not tour shipyards. He does not inspect fleets. He sits in small rooms explaining curves to men in uniform. One American admiral listens, frowning, then finally asks the question that has been avoided for months. "Professor, are we winning because of what we built, or because of how we think?" Blackett pauses. "Both," he says, "but only one of those can adapt faster than the enemy." By the spring of 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic is no longer discussed as a battle at all. It is logistics, it is flow, it is certainty. Convoys arrive on schedule. Losses are anticipated. Replacements are already assigned. The Atlantic has stopped being a gauntlet. It has become a corridor. Blackett walks home one evening through London, past bomb-damaged buildings and sandbagged entrances. He does not feel triumph. He feels something colder. The realization that the war was not won by genius or heroism, but by removing uncertainty from systems that once depended on it. He knows this method will not disappear after the war. Once people learn that conflict can be optimized, they will never forget it. May 4th, 1944. North Atlantic, south of Iceland. The convoy moves at dawn under a low ceiling of cloud, grey blending into grey. Commander Robert S. McCall, U.S. Navy, stands on the bridge of a Fletcher-class destroyer, coffee cooling untouched beside him. Ahead, columns of merchant ships stretch to the horizon, tankers, freighters, troop transports, their wakes overlapping in a pattern so precise it looks rehearsed. Because it is. McCall has escorted convoys since 1942. He remembers the fear, the constant sonar pings, the nights when every shadow felt like a torpedo track. This morning he feels something new. Confidence, not arrogance, not complacency. Confidence built on routine. The convoy spacing is exact, not tight enough to risk collision, not loose enough to create gaps. Aircraft rotate overhead on schedules timed down to minutes. Escort ships do not roam. They hold stations like sentries in a machine. McCall glances at the operations board. Every movement has been calculated before the convoy ever left port. Somewhere below the surface, a German U-boat commander watches the same formation through a periscope and sees nothing he can exploit. No stragglers, no chaos, no openings when escorts peel away. The convoy behaves like a single organism. He fires anyway. The torpedo misses, and suddenly the ocean is full of noise. Not panicked noise, directed noise. Sonar pings lock in immediately. Depth charges roll off stern racks in disciplined sequences. Aircraft arrive within minutes, not because the contact was dramatic, but because the coverage grid says they should be there. The U-boat dives deep. It survives. But it does not attack again. By mid-1944, this descente becomes the norm. U-boats still exist. They still sink ships, but they no longer shape the war. Losses are absorbed mathematically, not emotionally. At Allied headquarters, shipping losses are plotted alongside replacement curves. The graphs tell a story no propaganda poster ever could. Sinkings no longer matter, not strategically. The Atlantic has been neutralized as a weapon. Patrick Blackett reads these reports quietly from his office in London. He has not been at sea. He has not heard depth charges explode. He has not watched ships burn. But he understands something few admirals ever fully grasp. This war was never about destroying submarines. It was about removing their leverage. Blackett writes in a private letter, "Once the enemy cannot force decision through disruption, the outcome becomes inevitable." That inevitability is now visible everywhere. On June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history crosses the Channel. Thousands of ships move in synchronized waves. Landing craft, transports, fuel tankers, hospital ships. The Atlantic does not interfere. The U-boats do not stop it. They cannot. The ocean has been tamed, not by force, but by foresight. In Germany, naval officers finally understand the truth too late. A captured Kriegsmarine memorandum from late 1944 states, "Enemy convoy defense has reached a level where further submarine operations yield diminishing strategic return." Translated bluntly, the math no longer favors us. Blackett is invited to attend post-war planning meetings even before the war ends. Military leaders want to know how this happened. How a civilian with no command authority altered the course of a naval war. Blackett answers carefully. "I didn't change the ships," he says. "I changed the questions people asked about them." When the war ends in Europe in May 1945, the Atlantic is crowded beyond imagination. Ships move in numbers that would have seemed impossible in 1941. The U-boat pens sit empty. The shipping lanes pulse with traffic. The strangulation that once threatened Britain never comes again. Years later, historians will argue about radar, sonar, escort carriers, improved weapons. All of those mattered. But none of them explain the timing, the inflection point, the moment when losses stopped having consequences. That moment came when someone decided to stop fighting submarines, one by one, and instead fight probability itself. Patrick Blackett never commanded a ship, but he taught navies how to think, and once they learned, the Battle of the Atlantic was already over. August 1945, London. The war ends without ceremony in Patrick Blackett's office. There is no cheering in the corridor. No flags outside the window. Just the sound of papers being stacked, reports filed, chalkboards wiped clean of equations that once carried the weight of nations. Blackett sits at his desk, older now, thinner, spectacles sliding slightly down his nose as he rereads a memo from the Admiralty. The final summary of Atlantic shipping losses for the war. The numbers are astonishing. Britain is not starved. America is not slowed. The oceans are not barriers anymore. They are arteries, and yet nowhere in the document does his name appear. That suits him. During the war, Blackett never sought recognition. He argued. He challenged admirals. He irritated men who believed rank was proof of correctness. But when his recommendations worked, he stepped aside and let the system absorb them. That too was deliberate, because operational research only works when it disappears into routine. In the final post-war analysis, the Admiralty reaches a conclusion that feels almost anticlimactic. No single technological innovation decided the Battle of the Atlantic. Instead, it was coordination, probability, and acceptance of loss as a variable rather than a catastrophe. Convoys were not safer because U-boats vanished. They were safer because risk was managed instead of feared. That idea changes warfare forever. Blackett returns to academia after the war, uncomfortable with praise and wary of how his methods might be used in future conflicts. He warns students and officials alike. Statistics do not make moral decisions. They only reveal consequences. He understands the danger of his work as clearly as its power, because the same thinking that saves convoys can optimize bombing campaigns. The same logic that protects sailors can calculate civilian casualties. Blackett will spend the rest of his life wrestling with that reality. But in 1945, one truth is undeniable. Britain survives not because it outbuilt Germany at sea, not because it sank more submarines, but because it learned how to stop needing to sink them at all. The U-boats did not lose the Atlantic in a single battle. They lost it the moment their presence stopped influencing decisions. Years later, German naval officers interviewed by Allied historians struggled to explain the shift. "We were still sinking ships," one says, "but the war no longer reacted to us." That sentence contains the entire story. Patrick Blackett once summarized his philosophy with characteristic understatement. The enemy should be allowed to continue doing what does not help him. Germany kept sinking ships, Allies kept sailing anyway. And that is how the ocean stopped being a weapon. The Battle of the Atlantic is remembered as a clash of steel, depth charges, and courage. But beneath the waves, something quieter decided it. A civilian, a chalkboard, a refusal to accept tradition over evidence. The war at sea was not won by the loudest explosions. It was won by the moment someone asked, "What if we are solving the wrong problem?" and then proved it with numbers.